Hello and welcome to a quick PPR Econ 101 on market failure and government intervention. It's going to form the normal layout of a PPR Econ video, so obviously play it, pause it when I ask a question. I will answer it and then you can repeat it until you get everything right. So first thing obviously I need from you is what is market failure and what are the examples of market failure. So pause the video, answer that question please. Okay, so market failure is when a market fails to allocate resources efficiently. And you remember them, okay, via pumping. So, second thing I need you to do, pumping. What is, you should have pumped it down. So a brief explanation now of what each of them are. So what P is, what U is, what M is, what P is, IN and N is. So obviously P is public goods. So work your way down through them and explain what each of them are. So pause the video, do that. Okay, so pumping. First one is public goods. So what you should know about public goods then, the first P, is that they are goods that have got three characteristics. They are non-rejectable, non-rival, and non-excludable. Okay, so what we mean about each of these is, if something's non-rejectable, you can't stop yourself from consuming the good or service. So for example, national defence, okay, the army would be an example of something that's non-rejectable. You can't stop yourself if you live in the UK from being protected by the Navy or the British Army abroad. Okay, so that's a public good. It is non-rejectable. Non-rival means it's to do with the consumption and how much is available. Okay, so for example, if something is rival, it means that if I take, so a Mars bar is rival, if I take a bite out of a Mars bar, consume it, use it, there's less for someone else to eat. But streetlights, for example, just because I'm using a street light, it doesn't diminish the amount there is for everyone else in my street to use of a street light. So it doesn't diminish as more people consume it. And non-excludable means that you can't be stopped from using a product that is a public good. So for example, fireworks. If you're in the vicinity, our flood defence system, if you're in the vicinity to see the fireworks or to be protected, your house to be protected from the flood defence system, you can't be stopped from using it. Okay, that's the example of that. So these three characteristics create what we called, and it's a very important term you have to understand, the free rider problem, which is why in the free market, public goods are an example of a complete market failure. Okay, they are a missing market because no one is going to provide a public good if all these characteristics are in existence, because as an entrepreneur, as the producer, you cannot extrapolate profit from it. You can't stop people from using it. So if some people do, some people won't. So it creates a missing market because of a free rider problem, which is basically, I suppose, everything you really need to know about public goods. Second thing I hope you got down was unequal income and wealth. Unequal distribution of income and wealth. A market failure in the sense that resources aren't allocated fairly, because people, if there is inequality, richer people can obviously allocate resources, or will use more of their financial power to how to allocate resources to their more maybe luxury goods as opposed to necessities for the rest of society. And obviously some people lower incomes, if there's extreme inequality, won't be able to vote their demand. I suppose they won't be able to access any goods and services, which is an equity and a fairness argument. We calculate inequality via a Gini coefficient, which is important to understand. The UK's is about 0.35. If it's 0, it means there's perfect equality. If there's 1, I always remember one person owns all the wealth, so it's maximum inequality. So that is unequal distribution of income and wealth. For M, you should have got monopoly power, or monopolies, monopoly markets. monopoly is a market failure because they restrict output and charge higher prices. Okay, they are not allocatively efficient, which we'll look at soon. There's deadweight losses created in monopoly markets because of their power, their price setting power, their monopoly power, and their ability to set higher prices. And to do that, they obviously restrict output and make scarcity an issue, which is how they can charge or extrapolate the more consumer surplus. We've also got positive externalities. An externality, hopefully you've wrote down, spillover effect onto a third party not involved in the economic transaction. Positive externalities we normally associate with merit goods, or are associated with merit goods. Merit goods are things that are under consumed or produced in a free market due to information failure or lack of information, things like education, healthcare. So that's positive externalities. Exercise is one, fruit and vegetables is another. So they're what we call merit goods, and positive externalities are underconsumed. Flip it around, jump to the N next actually. The N is obviously for negative externalities. They are goods or services that have got, or demerit goods have got negative externalities associated with them. They're things like cigarettes, alcohol. They've got negative spillover effects and are overconsumed due to information failures. They're negative externalities. I left out the I. The I stands for immobility. We've got two types of immobility. We've got geographical and we've got occupational immobility. Geographical is whenever economic agents, particularly workers, cannot move or locate to areas within an area that their skills are more suitable for, where maybe they can't get jobs because they can't get to the area because of lack of infrastructure. Maybe it's too expensive. Geographic immobility is to do with the inability to move to where your skills are needed. And occupational mobility is to do with the skill set, the qualifications that people have, the inflexibility, if that's a word, of their qualifications. So they don't have the qualifications to take part in jobs that are available. That's occupational mobility. So that was what you should have got for your explanations of your pumping, your examples of merit goods. The next thing I need is diagrams. Okay, so I would like diagrams. You can pause the video and draw all these. For inequality, we'll do the Lorenz curve. Let's do positive externalities in consumption, negative externalities in production. Let's do subsidy showing incidence and a tax showing incidence. Okay, I'll draw them all in this area here. So go ahead, draw them 5 videos, pause the video, see how you get on. Okay, let's have a go at Lorenz curve. Axes for some of these is obviously different. You will get away with the percentage of income, wrote out fully there, and the percentage of the population, wrote there. It's technically percentage accumulated income by percentage accumulated, or the accumulated percentage of the population that get that income. So we always start off with a 45-degree line. That's your 45-degree line of equality, and then you've got the banana curve. Okay, I always do 2. So there's A and there's B. Okay. A is more equal than B. B is more unequal than A. If you are in an essay talking about policies that will improve equality or reduce inequality, you would go from B to A. Okay, if you're showing worsening inequality, you go from A to B. Okay, quite straightforward. That's the Lorenz curve. Just in regards to something that you might get asked about. The Gini coefficient. Okay, we've got this area A, this area B. To calculate the Gini coefficient, it's A over A plus B, and that gives us the Gini coefficient. If that is equal to 0, it's perfect equality. If it's equal to 1, like I said earlier, one person has all the income or wealth, that's maximum inequality. Okay, so that is the old Lorenz curve. Hopefully you've all also had a go at the externality diagram. So let's have a go at positive in consumption. Before we start that, a little tip for externality diagrams is to remember consumption is to do with benefits, which is reflected via the demand curve, and production externalities are to do with costs, which are reflected via the supply curve. If you can do that, remember that, you're probably going to get these diagrams correct. So let's have a look at this one then. We have got axes, so remember axes is price, and in brackets please write out cost and benefit because we're reflecting that as well, and quantity wrote out there. I always start with an X at P1 and Q1 because that is where I would like to be at. Okay, this isn't the free market position, this is the socially optimum level of consumption. Because it's the socially optimal level, there's a clue here. We've got our two S's, we've got our two socials, we've got marginal social. Remember, supply curve is costs. We've got marginal social, remember demand curve is benefits. So that's where we start off at. Well, that's how I start off. Then, if there are positive externalities, they are underconsumed in a free market. So we know Q star, our free market position, is going to be less than Q1. So from here, I need to draw another consumption demand curve, okay, that is going to have create a equilibrium less than Q1. So if you can see the little sort of line here, if I put it there, the equilibrium is going to be here, it's going to be higher. So the only place I can put a marginal private, oh my god, I've just made a mistake, I'm so sorry, that would be positive, that's the wrong thing. Give me 1 second, that's a boo-boo for myself, apologies. I just said it's demand curve and I shifted the supply curve. The only place I can draw a new, I can't put it there, the demand curve, because the output's going to be higher. So the only place I can put it is there, and that is my marginal private benefit. Private benefit in the sense that that's where we will consume at in the free market. If there's no externalities here in production, we say marginal social cost is equal to marginal private cost. So our privately optimum position will be here, and that's where we locate at or produce at in the free market. Now I know that Q star didn't quite match up, but you can see it's less than Q1, so Q star should technically go there. One last thing to do, as usual, in our externality diagrams, and that is shade in an area of deadweight loss. So I always go from private, where we're at in the free market, to where you would like to be if the government's intervened and corrected it. And the arrow always points the same as this arrow. So that's our area of deadweight loss. It shows the underconsumption at every level in the free market. So this is the positive externalities that are in existence, and we should consume up to here, where social costs equals social benefits, the socially optimum position. So hopefully, if you didn't get the negative externalities in production correct, you should hopefully now be able to work it out. If you didn't, I'll give you a second. I'll pause the video, see if you can work it out. So if you do it the way I just done it, it should hopefully work out. So we have got, start off, oh, I'm going in yellow this time. We've got socials meeting for our socially optimum position, P1 and Q1. So we've got our marginal social supply curve costs and marginal social demand curve benefit. Free market, these goods are have negative externalities associated with them. So in the free market we will be at Q star. We need to consume or produce, in this case, sorry, less of the product. So it's supply curve that I'm shifting because it's due to costs. So where am I going to put the supply curve that creates a higher equilibrium? If I put it there, it's going to be less. So I put it here, MPC, private costs. No externalities in consumption. So equals marginal private benefit. Two P's meet. Here is our privately optimum position. This is where we're at in the free market. So you can see Q star and P star. We are producing too much because the issue is our private costs are P star, where that's things like the running of the factory, the premises, the rent, the workers, the raw materials. The issue is that we've got external costs that equate to our social costs. Remember, social costs are private costs plus external costs. These externalities are things like acid rain, congestion, all these external factors. So they are higher and they are not taken into consideration. So you go from your socially optimum position to your deadweight loss. So you go from social or from private to social. RO points the same way as that. There's our DWL. They are all our levels. Every level here that is not Q1 above it has got a misallocation of resources. The social costs are always higher than the private costs. We have to produce at this level, which is the socially optimum position. Subsidy incidents. I'm going to actually take a completely new page here, if that's all right. So we've got a bit more room. Price QD/S. Let's go actually with the incidence of an indirect tax first. A good diagram to be able to draw for this one is obviously if it's on something like cigarettes. So cigarettes have a fairly inelastic demand, as you can see there. Sticking a supply curve. Issue is we are currently here and here. So we're not happy with this overconsumption, this high level of quantity for something like cigarettes. So we put a specific tax in place. A tax per unit, parallel shift in the supply curve, creates this new P1 and Q1. Less output, higher prices. Less quantity, higher prices, right? Now, to calculate the tax per unit, this is very important you're able to do this, it's the vertical distance. That's the tax per unit, okay? It's always the vertical distance between two supply curves. The tax is money going to the government. The firms now have to pay this tax. They gain it from consumers, they pay a bit for themselves, they give it to the government. At this new price, the tax will be right down to the old supply curve there. That is the value of the tax per unit, okay? So for example, let's put a bit of numbers in place here. If the new price, say, is now, let's go with £15. The old price was, let's say, £12, okay? If we go down to here, okay, this box here is the total amount of money going to the government. Okay, the quantity sold from zero, every unit that's sold is being taxed this amount. Now hopefully if I put in that this is £10, we know that the tax per unit is obviously equal to £5. So if there was 100 units sold, we know the government would collect 100 times 5, which is £500 overall. But the incidence of tax breaks it down a bit more. So what we look at is who pays what of the tax. Consumers used to pay £12, now they pay £15. So of this, over the price level, part of the tax is paid for by the consumers. So they will pay an extra £3 for every unit sold, which means consumer incidence or burden is £300. Obviously if you take away or work out the rest, it's going to be £200 that the business has to pay. But obviously in the diagram, we see that the business pays the rest of this tax. And that's obviously £2 times 100, which is 200. Okay, so incidence of tax. It's important that you're able to identify the tax revenue, calculate the tax revenue, and divide throughout the whole price who pays what of the tax. We've also got a subsidy. Let's go elastic this time. So let's go with a elastic demand curve. There's our original supply, there's our price, P star. Issue is the price is too high and we're not consuming enough. Oh, I just realised something last time, by the way. Do you know the it's not there actually, but do you know the diagram I just drew in regards to the demand? This one about the tax. Okay, obviously the issue is that the quantity doesn't fall that much, but a good point to make in essays is hypothecation. This tax can be hypothecated. it can be set aside and used for a specific purpose. So good AO4 point is the fact that an indirect tax with a product that's got an inelastic demand like cigarettes, even though the price goes up, consumers will still pay it because of addiction. So therefore, it's not going to reduce the market failure. But the tax revenue could be hypothecated in the sense that it can be set aside for a specific purpose, i.e. provision of information about the damages cigarettes do to consumers, which obviously can help address the market failure. So hypothecation is a good term. Back to subsidies. Hopefully you drew this diagram. So subsidy is a financial package designed to increase consumption and reduce the market price of a product. It's given by the government to producers. So now we've got a new output because of the subsidy and an increase in consumption. Incidence of a tax, right, or incidence of a subsidy. To produce at Q1, the government have had to subsidise. The subsidies the vertical distance as well. So they've had to subsidise up to the old supply curve. That is the subsidy per unit. So every single unit has been subsidised that amount. That's how they get to produce here from there. So this box is the cost of the subsidy to the government. That's how expensive it will be. Now, break it in half at the price, like we did with the tax, and you can see the consumer this time benefits from the lower price. The consumer benefit is this lower price. The producers, in this case, actually are the ones that benefit more from it. They benefit from this increased amount of production, and they benefit from that part of the subsidy. So whole subsidy, break it down at the price, and the incidence of tax for this one is on the producer as they benefit more from a subsidy. I did realise I didn't do the monopoly diagram. So you can draw a monopoly diagram from year one. Inelastic demand, supply, P star, Q star. Monopolies restrict output in order to charge these higher prices. Deadweight loss, misallocation of resources. Allocatively efficient, not. Okay, so they reduce consumer surplus, which is the area above the price level but below the demand curve. So consumer surplus is restricted. We've got deadweight loss and misallocation of resources. In year two, obviously, we've got a bit more of an advanced diagram. Price, cost, revenue, quantity or output, Nike tick, AC touch net its lowest point, MR, AR. They'll produce where MR equals MC. Pmax, profit maximizers, up to the AR curve. There's P star, where it touches the cost, is the cost per unit, and they will make supernormal profits. That's what monopolies do. They produce there because they're profit maximizers. And allocatively efficient, so how resources should be allocated in regards to consumer and producer surplus or welfare, is where AR equals MC, where demand equals supply, which as you can clearly see is here. And that is not the output or the price that is being charged in this market. So you could actually technically say this area here also represents a misallocation of resources, a deadweight loss. So that's a few of the diagrams you need to know for market failure. You should be able to draw them. Now what I need you to do, pause the video, right, pumping down again. Now I want you to think about as many possible government interventions that could be used to correct every market failure. So pause the video, do that. So let's go pumping. So public goods, there's only one. State provision. Okay, due to the fact that we've got a free rider problem and no private individual is going to supply public goods because everyone else can use it without getting charged, the government have to provide, the state have to provide street lights, national defence, flood defence systems. Unequal distribution of income and wealth, hopefully you got a few of these. We introduce a more progressive tax system. Hopefully you've also got maybe increased national minimum wage, increased benefits. You could also probably talk about increased spending on education to get people more skills, more qualifications, and enable them to join the workforce. An interesting one you might want to look up in the future might be UBI. It was talked about a few years ago. It's kind of died down a wee bit. Universal Basic Income. There's some arguments for and against that in regards to giving everyone a universal, the exact same income, regardless of work status. So they've all got a certain standard of living. It's important whenever you're talking about inequality. I forgot to mention as well, poverty. We've got two types. We've got absolute poverty and we've got relative poverty. Make sure you know the difference between the two of them, and obviously mention them in your analysis and policies. Monopoly power, regulation would be a big thing, like CMA. Price controls, you would probably use a price ceiling to bring the price of the monopoly down. There's obviously criticisms with that. Let me think. I just realised that on the incidence of tax and subsidy in the previous video, whenever that probably should be next, but whatever. Price ceiling. You could also tax, so an indirect tax. You could also windfall tax, take a lot of the supernormal profits from these firms and use them. You could subsidise new entrants into the market, which could also work for monopolies. Positive externalities, merit goods. You're talking about things like provision of information being a good one. So that's advertisement campaigns about the impact or why we need to consume more of our merit goods. You can have state provision as well on things like education and healthcare, like we do in the UK. You can subsidise the consumption of merit goods as well. That could be used. And you could also price control. You could put a price ceiling in order to reduce it and make it more affordable. Let's jump down to negative externalities. It's mostly the opposite. So provision of information as well. So campaigns, information, leaflets, guidance upon the damaging impact of fatty foods, for example. Regulation as well. So regulators putting in place laws, legislation, protocols to follow. So for example, vapes in Australia have recently been banned, apart from pharmaceutical or prescriptions, to deal with that. You could also talk about taxes. So specific taxes on cigarettes, for example, alcohol. In Scotland, they've got a minimum unit price, which is an example of a price floor, increasing the price of the product to hopefully restrict consumption as well. So there are some examples for negative externalities. For geographical mobility, obviously a big one is things like infrastructure, making housing more affordable. So looking at the housing market, and also maybe subsidies or incentives to get people to locate in other areas. Occupational, governments can subsidise things like apprenticeship schemes, etc. More spending on education and updated education systems to make the labour market more flexible would be another good one to use for occupational immobility. Okay, so that is your government interventions. Don't forget price controls, right? Supply, demand. If the price is too high, okay, and you want to reduce the price, for example, rent in London, okay, remember if rent in London is currently say 1,000, okay, you want to bring down that price, so you would introduce what's called a maximum price. Okay, maximum prices, don't be confused by max thinking high as possible. Maximum prices go below the equilibrium. Okay, maximum price. There are price ceiling. You can't go above the maximum. So this is no longer able to be legally charged. So the maximum price in London might be now £700 for rent. Issue with it is we've got Q1 and Q2. Q1 is the quantity supplied. Q2 is the quantity demanded. We've got excess demand now in the market. More people want to live in London, move to London, but there's a lack, there's been a contraction in the supply. people maybe home or landlords have maybe sold the property because there's not as much profit. They can't maybe afford to be able to still maintain renting out the property because of the lower profit return. So therefore there is a contraction in supply, expansion in demand, excess demand will create a shortage, which is an issue with price ceilings or maximum prices. Remember, minimum prices, price floors, go above, that's the floor. You can't go lower than the floor. Think about national minimum wage. If the going wage rate, I know this will be wage rate then, and this will be supply of labour and demand for labour, but if the going wage rate is say £5 an hour, you want to drive up the wage rate to £10 minimum price. You don't want people being paid less than that. Again, creates an issue. We've got more supply, more people want to work than want to be employed by employers. So that means unemployment is created, or in a product market, excess supply, and therefore there will be a surplus of the product because of the higher price. So make sure you know your price diagrams. Last thing, pause the video, write down all the government failures what government failure is and all the examples of government failure we have. Alright, government failure is when the government intervene to correct market failures. Okay, so they intervene, but either make the situation worse or create a new market failure. Okay, so government intervention or government failure is when the government intervenes to correct the market failure, but instead exacerbate the existing market failure or create a new market failure. And you remember them via cripple. Okay, cripple. Costs outweigh benefit. We've got, so the cost outweighing the benefit, let's just go through them one at a time. Cost outweighing the benefit, for example, you can maybe look at HS2. HS2 is a policy designed to improve geographical mobility in the UK to get people from London connected with first off Birmingham and then onwards to Manchester to get people to move to and from the city in less and less time. The cost initially started at about 40 billion. It is now exploded up to near 100 billion. So the question now is, will the cost of HS2 outweigh the benefit? And if it does, that will be classified as a government failure. If the cost of it, if it's more expensive than the benefits to the economy. Next one, regulatory capture, is this theory that regulators basically aren't doing their job as efficiently or correctly or stringently as they possibly could do. So they've obviously got rules they have to follow, they've got fines they have to put in place if procedures aren't followed, if emissions are exceeded. If they if they get captured by the industry in the sense that they get to know maybe the CEOs, the bosses, the managers, or the way the market works, they might not put in place these fines. They might not work as stringently or fine as excessively as they should. So regulatory capture is basically when regulators don't do their job as they should. Info failure, quite straightforward. It's very hard to gauge how much to tax, how much to subsidise. Obviously, we've got economists that work in the civil service that help produce data about this, but we might tax too much. Think about the Laffer curve. We might subsidise too little or too much. There's been a lot of policies in the past. So information failure in the sense that we don't have enough information in order to set the right price control as well, or things like that. Political self-interest. Basically, whenever politicians make decisions based on constituency views or needs, or maybe relatives working in particular industries or occupations, they make decisions more based on their own gain, self-gain, rather than the economy needs or citizens' needs. That's political self-interest. Maybe coming up to an election, they might introduce policies that make them look more favourable. I know it's macro, but maybe cutting taxes coming up to an election whenever the economy is in a boom phase. Yes, it will look good and make people feel better because they got more disposable income, but economically that might be quite disastrous because it can help maybe incentivize a boom or a speculative bubble. So self-interest, political self-interest, is that. Policy myopia, quite straightforward, a good one you can use. That is short-term policies, so having a short-term view about the market failure, about the issue, and not addressing the long-term needs, maybe in education, infrastructure. And the last one, I'm not going to fit it in that way, is the law of unintended consequences. Okay, so they are basically issues that arise whenever the government's intervening. So say they introduce a ban on vapes. Okay, so an unintended consequence might be the rise of unregulated alternatives that they don't see, and that can cause serious health issues, for example. Or black markets might form, or illegal activities like smuggling might come if they put more taxes on cigarettes. So the law of unintended consequences is just unintended situations that arise from the government intervention. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a brief run through of micro market failure and government intervention with government failure. So, yeah, play that video again if you didn't answer all the questions, and happy revision.